So this is the one I want to talk about. This is the one that bothered me because I felt like it was so poorly done. This engendered a lot of good discussion in the comments, so I'm going to try and talk about it nicely. Atrioc's recent Marketing Monday pushes bad economic analysis. I want to get into a larger point here that I have about Reddit in general. When sites like Reddit first started popping up, they were a great way to get delivered new news articles. So you could click on something trending, find a news article, see something interesting, maybe talk about it in the comments. But because of the way human brains work, we want shortcuts. So what we started to do was we would see the headline of the article and realize we could skip reading it if we just clicked in and looked at the top comments. Often, especially in the earlier days of Reddit, you would find someone who's like has a genuine deep knowledge of the subject they're talking about, and they would write these posts and you could use it as a shortcut. The problem is there's this thing called Bayesian mimicry. Bayesian mimicry in nature is when an animal like this toad pretends to look like a predator to scare people off. And because of the way our brains have adapted to this shortcut, people have realized if they write a long enough bullshit Reddit post, our brains will think, oh, this is the same thing as those old, well thought out posts. But instead, there's nothing there. It's an inch deep. It's shallow. There's no actual research or thought behind it. Let me give a next example. In 2016, Airpods came out. Well, this was the top post on Reddit, okay? The top post on Reddit. Hey, this is what Airpods look like. And if you look at the top comments, it's a guy like this writing as if he has the knowledge of the universe. The digital music is just that, digital, but speakers are dumb analog machines and need a lot of help. This is a dumber move than it first seems. The whole point is he is tearing down Airpods. They will not work. They will not be successful. People can't do it. As of today, Airpods, if they were in their own company, would be bigger than Nike. Airpods alone would be bigger than Nike. But if you look at the Reddit, it is filled with people writing posts like this. And if you read this, you'll be convinced. So I want to give this general thought before you go in. You have to start breaking the cycle of looking at the top comment on something and just thinking it's a long post. It must have you have to engage with it. Now I want to look at this post. I don't even really mind the post. In my presentation that I gave, I made, I think probably 6 times in it, I'm like, hey, there's areas I could be wrong. It's just like a general sense when I'm in presentation, like, hey, I'm giving my thoughts, but there are other takes. And there's a smugness to this absolutely paper thin post that it just bothers me. It's so smug, as if you are the authority on economic analysis, okay? And again, so I'm mad going into it. I read this title, I'm mad, okay? And then I read the first point, and it's, again, not to be mean here, but this paragraph shows a complete misunderstanding of what I even said. It's like basic media literacy. What he says is bad analogy to 2008. The current economy is very different from 2008. Back then, the issue is pervasive subprime mortgage loans, which doesn't seem to exist today. Atriok points seem to be in 2008, the market's good. Therefore, someone became indicators of recession. The analysis is absurd. If he wants to compare our situation to 2008, he should address the root cause of 2008. It's like, I just watched The Big Short and I want to let you know I know what 2008 was. That's not what the presentation was at all. The presentation was, and I'll remind you, I know sometimes I can be obtuse. I feel like most people followed this. I said, look, a lot of people, if you do the anecdotes, most people in America, like 62%, say the economy is bad. They're feeling bad about the economy. So anecdotally, they're feeling bad. And then there's a Jeff Bezos quote that says, if the anecdotes and the data disagree, trust the anecdotes. You might be measuring the wrong thing. That was the idea. So I did the first 2 things. And then I said, okay, so what are the easy counter arguments that people might say if you said, hey, we're headed into or are in a recession? What are the easy counter arguments? People might say, okay, the Fed chair said we're not in a recession. Then I said, as an example, here's 2008. That happened and we still got a recession. All I'm doing is very basic. I'm going through the basic counter arguments and disproving them by showing how they didn't work before. For example, the unemployment rate is low. Okay, so let's look at 2008. The unemployment rate was low and we still got a recession. We fucking racketed up. Or someone might say GDP is not negative 2 quarters. That's the definition. It's not a recession. I'm like, okay, if we look at all previous recessions, 2001, 2008, everything, they get revised down after the fact. And so that's not it. That doesn't disprove it. All I'm doing is going one by one down the list to help build a larger argument. It's structured. I'm going step by step. And if you can't follow that from the beginning, then coming in here and saying bad economic analysis is very annoying. Also, by the way, not to go too deep in the weeds here, there's a great writer about the real estate industry named Melody Wright, and she has a paid Substack. I don't want to show the whole thing because this is paid, called Storm Clouds a Brewin'. This came out a few days ago after my presentation. She is worked in the real estate industry for 30 years. And when I find subsects like this, I'm looking for people who have, usually they have a small audience focused on people in the industry. And I read all of this, and all of this is about, hey, I'm noticing a lot of parallels in subprime between now and 2008. So even this point, if you want to go deeper, is wrong. I mean, the most damning was like, this is delinquency by vintage year. What this means is what year you bought the house. People that bought their house in 2020, 2021, 2022, they are all defaulting at higher than average rates, because it doesn't matter whether our credit quality, whether our credit scores are a little bit higher than they were in 2008. If the prices are so much higher that they can't, like, because you pay your credit card on time doesn't mean you can afford a house that you bought way out of your price range. Doing great in 24. Well, if they just bought the house this year, they haven't defaulted yet. But if you bought the house 2 years ago and you're already defaulting, that's crazy. There's a lot of evidence that storm clouds are brewing even in the residential housing space in the same way as 2008. And I didn't even talk about that in the presentation, but you clearly didn't even do that research. So it's very frustrating to hear you come in with a title that's so incendiary. Non-prime mortgages exist. Exactly. Non-prime still exists. And then what people don't talk about as well is that while the banks have better balance sheets than 2008, they're not stuck full of subprime mortgages. A lot of people nowadays go to non-bank lenders. If any of you tried to buy a house, you might have noticed how you got outbid with cash. It's not always cash. It's people going to non-bank lenders to get cash-like equivalent to be able to overbid for a house. There's a lot of people who are actually in debt that aren't on a bank's books that we don't know about. Then this one, bad housing analysis. Housing markets are generally quite localized. So Big A claiming Texas or Florida or even Lee County's housing market can be applied to the entire country is wild. Again, I didn't do this. Did anyone watch the presentation? I said there's 8 states. There's 8 states where there's a clear problem. Now it could spread. Obviously it could spread. And again, the housing market is not entirely localized. There is localized pricing, but we can have a countrywide problem, especially if they all have the same basic inputs, which is off-books mortgages and declining employment. That's all a problem. I mean, the house pricing is very high all over the country and unemployment's rising. Very simple. Bad AI analysis. This one, I got something for you. HROC seems to be critiquing 2 opposing ideas. Number 1, AI boom is purely driven by hype, and NVIDIA is the one bidding from it. Number 2, AI will cause mass layoffs for its ability to replace human work. The problems of these claims is if AI can drastically replace human work, by definition, it's increasing productivity and not driven by purely hype. No, you can't just make them opposing ideas because you feel like that. Do you know why? I'll take my name out of it. Let's pull up the exact same thought from Google executive James Manyika from, again, after my presentation. After my presentation, he says the same thing. People are putting out these extraordinary economic potential numbers. The productivity gains are not guaranteed. They're only going in a cost-cutting direction. It's like a normal thought. The idea is people are putting in billions and billions and billions of dollars and expecting trillions of global output, but all we're getting is basic cost cutting. The cost cutting is not enough. It doesn't make enough money for the AI companies to justify the huge valuations, and it also loses jobs, so it hurts the economy. They both can be true at the same time. You cannot make them opposing just because you said it in a Reddit post. And then he hits me with a Student 101. Also, every invention machine ever caused old jobs to disappear. For example, cars make carriage drivers obsolete. Tractors make farmers lose their jobs. Bro is hitting me with the John Henry. We're talking, it's so basic. What's frustrating to me is people in the comments are like, wow, good points. Like, this is what a grade schooler might say, and you're hitting me with good points. Yes, I know. I'm well aware that cars have made carriages obsolete. We're talking about something real happening right now with a huge fucking hype bubble and what it's actually being used for being far smaller, but far more damaging to employees. Anyway, I was very frustrating. Deceptive graph use. He intentionally chose to start the deficit graph at the 2000s, where we have a surplus. However, if we expanded the graph, we can see the US regularly has a deficit, albeit not as much. Okay, let's expand the graph, bro. So I started it here, but sure, we can start it back here in 1971. The trend is the same. I started it here because this is the last time we had a politician that got a surplus. Bill Clinton got a surplus. He didn't lie. The whole point was during our lifetimes, the past 30 years, politicians have lied about getting rid of the debt. But you're like, oh, you didn't go bar bargain. If you go back to before this, we don't have deficits at all. Again, and you can see, again, I don't think this guy's a bad person. I'm not particularly mad at him. I'm mad at the idea that people can write on Reddit and someone in the comments is like, well, that's a long post. Good points. Good points. This really undermines HROC's well thought out presentation. And then finally, this was very frustrating. Ignore strong economy indicators. For example, US unemployment rate is still considered full unemployment. Inflation rate is down. GDP growth is at 3%. These are all things that I talked about in the opening of the presentation. It was the entire point of my comparisons to 2008. I was saying these headline numbers are often revised down in a recession. I didn't ignore them. I talked about them as my main argument. And to show you, to give you more detail, again, I have to cut these down sometimes for the presentation, so it's not 500 slides, but it doesn't mean I don't read about it. This is the GDP growth rate discrepancies of 2008. Let's just look at Q1. So in Q1 of 2008, they put out a GDP number and said, hey, the economy's growing. Then later they said, wait a minute, the economy's really growing. Wait a minute, it actually grew a lot. And then by 2009, they said, oh wait, we were wrong, it actually shrunk. Wait, actually we were in a recession in that month. And then by 2011, like, oh, actually it was a really bad recession. And then by 2013, they're like, actually it was a terrible recession. This is what I'm saying. This is what happens. It could take years for them to finally revise the numbers down to being accurate, to being like, oh, actually it was pretty bad, because the GDP formula is not very good. The GDP formula is very prone to error. It takes a while to filter down, especially if the jobs numbers are also bad, because they use the bad jobs numbers to calculate the GDP number. So like recently we had 800,000 fewer jobs. It revised it down in our jobs number. That takes a while to filter back to the GDP revisions, which are still high right now, but could be revised down. So I'm making this argument, I think, pretty clearly in the presentation, but you are telling me that I ignored the GDP. That is frustrating. And if you say that you're a fan of me and like my analysis otherwise, but not this, I don't see how you cannot expect me to be frustrated. I feel like you're not giving me enough credit here. Again, I have no problem with someone saying they disagree or they have different conclusions. In fact, at the end of this little rant, I'm gonna tell you the true spear through the heart of my argument. The thing that I think is really, I don't have a great answer to, okay? I'll tell you that right at the end. But that type of analysis is not in your post. And then at the end, TLDR, HROC pushes bad analogies and bad analysis while ignoring strong indicators for a solid economy. I have no problem if you wanted to bring this all up as questions. Hey man, I had some questions. Maybe I didn't fully understand this part, or maybe I wish you could have explained this more. But this is crazy, especially when your post is this. When it's this paper thin, that is frustrating. And I have my right to be mad about it. And what I was impressed by and happy by is that one guy was actually smart in chat. I mean, some of these people were smart. Maybe it's Paulo Shanter. Yes, Paulo Shanter, if you're in chat, you're a hero because you kept me from throwing my keyboard at the wall. Paulo Shanter went point by point, explained all of this clearly and simply, and then said, TLDR, you misinterpreted the whole point. Thank God. He wrote not even long paragraphs, just simple and clear, and explained it. I was impressed and I was glad something got through to somebody. Anyway, what I do want to say is, here's the real arrow through the heart of my presentation that I think is a fair counter argument if someone wanted to make it. In my original presentation, I said, hey, Jerome Powell probably won't use the money printer. He won't let that chopper sing because we've gotten inflation. Because inflation is already here, it's broken down to actual goods. If we go straight back to the money printer, it's gonna break through to the economy. We're gonna have massive inflation again. He's been trying to fight it. Here's the deal. Every single time we have had any disruption, any type of minor recession, any type of threat to the asset holders that own stocks and houses, they have gone deeper and deeper and deeper into the money printer well to make things go back to normal. So realistically, if it happens again, we will go 10 trillion deep before we let the boomers lose their value. We will print till God's green earth. We will inflate the cost of groceries 30% if it gets the boomers back. That is a real thing that could happen. I am of the opinion, I took the stance, my theory is that we're at the end of the rope, that right around 120% debt to GDP, once we're already at 3 trillion deficits, they can't go back to this well. People are too angry about inflation for them to do it. But I am probably, if I think about it, wrong. We have built so much around protecting asset holders, we might just do it. We might just protect asset holders. So I can't give you a deep answer for that. We don't know what the reaction function of the government will be. They've done crazy things. I mean, again, in 2008, we printed out $800 billion to bail out the banks, and then we started printing money every quarter to buy US bonds. It was called quantitative easing. We invented that. We've done a lot of new rules and changed the system. It's not on this graph, but like back in the 20s, they banned people from owning gold so they can keep the economy going. They will invent rules if things get bad enough. And I don't have the answer for that. I mentioned that in the presentation, but I didn't go deep enough on it. And that is a fair criticism. But that is not what your criticism was. Oh, last thing. Yeah, one more thing. Posts I'm getting. Again, I think in general, the presentation was well received. I'm not trying to be fucking Mad Mancy over a few posts, but the default response, if someone makes a point about the economy in a negative way and you don't want to hear it, is to say, oh, Perma Bear here always thinks there's a recession. The most annoying one is, oh, they predicted 11 out of the last 2 recessions, which is, I read old posts. Boomers have been saying that in the comments of like Yahoo Finance articles for 30 years. It's the most boomer loser response. It is the most, I have no brain and a no actual response to this. And it is so boomer, but it's especially untrue for me because I have only been streaming since 2020. And since 2021, I was a perma tech bull. I was all in. The only thing that started to change my mind slightly was NFTs and crypto in 21. And that was the first and only thing I was bearish on. GameStop, crypto, NFTs. But ever since 2021, people were like, oh, he's such a perma bear. No, in fact, with my actions, I've been an all-in NVIDIA bull till July of this year. But if you look at this chart, this part right here, around late 22, maybe early 23, is when I started to notice that unemployment and the S&P were diverging. Once I started to notice that this was diverging, I started to bring up that there might be something wrong. But I've only made one recession call. One. I said Q2 24 in August of 23. That is the only recession call I've made. Show me one video from 2021 where I call a recession. Oh, he's been calling a recession for 3 years. I have not. I've been saying GameStop sucks for 3 years. I've been saying crypto sucks for 3 years. I've been saying NFT sucks for 3 years. But it's very frustrating to be mischaracterized. And generally, if I'm more cautious when I talk about huge bubbles, it is because I'm speaking to a younger audience who I feel like is constantly sucked in by sports gambling and Afterpay and Klarna and meme stocks and shit coins to the moon and everything is safe. I feel like that is an audience where nobody else is telling them, hey, caution, people lose money on this stuff. Let's be careful. Now I'm done rambling. I'm sorry. I went too deep, but I just wanted to give a response because I feel like if I don't respond, people are like, oh, he doesn't have an answer. I do have an answer. And by the way, I'm saying this now. If this happens in the future, I'm either gonna probably ignore it or maybe even delete the post. Because I don't want to incentivize every response to a video being as incendiary as possible to try and clickbait me into reacting. I'll respond to the good, well thought out stuff.